Philanthropist Yael Eckstein updates us on the continuing crisis in the Middle East. Radio and TV host Todd Starnes talks about his new book, Spangled Blessings. And we revisit some great American heroes, Korean and Vietnam War veteran Lieutenant General Hal Moore, and Vietnam prisoner of war retired Navy Rear Admiral Jeremiah Denton all share their stories. The world over, Independence Day edition begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important show for you this week. If you'd like to comment, send me an X post. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, also at Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube. First, some news. Independent Vatican journalist Diane Montagna is revealing previously undisclosed documents this week that raise serious questions about the justification for Pope Francis's restrictions on the traditional Latin liturgy. The journalist has obtained the summary of that survey of the world's bishops. That was the reason Pope Francis issued these restrictions. As we've covered since its release, Pope Francis issued Traditionis Custodes, guardians of the tradition, in 2021 in order to severely limit the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. His stated rationale was based on this never-before-seen survey of the world's bishops in 2020. Upon release of Traditionis, Pope Francis told the world that his survey of the world's bishops, quote, reveal a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene, end quote. The Pope said the survey compelled him to rescind Pope Benedict's permission for the traditional Latin Mass, known as Summorum Pontificum. But now, we discovered that the bishops of the world and the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith reported just the opposite to Pope Francis. The previously undisclosed text, now revealed by Montagna, says, quote, the majority of bishops who responded to the questionnaire stated that making legislative changes to Summorum Pontificum would cause more harm than good, and that the majority of the bishops who responded to the questionnaire and have generously and intelligently implemented Summorum Pontificum ultimately expressed satisfaction with it. So the survey did not find what was alleged by the former pope. In fact, it reported that young people were drawn to the ancient rite. Since Pope Francis's passing, at least 2 U.S. dioceses implemented even further restrictions to comply with the Pope's or former Pope's regulation. The Diocese of Charlotte has paused those restrictions, but the Archdiocese of Detroit's ban on the TLM in all parish churches began this week. More on where this goes next with the Papal Posse and Diane Montagna next week. And though the old Mass has been severely limited, the Vatican has released a new Mass for, quote, the care of creation on July 3rd. This new liturgy will be added to the Roman Missal under the category of Masses for various needs. The Mass was composed for the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis's ecologically themed encyclical Laudato Si. Pope Leo approved the Mass during a June 3rd meeting with Prefect of the Dicastery of Divine Worship, Cardinal Arthur Roche. Pope Francis made environmental concerns a hallmark of his 12-year pontificate. And in an address to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, Pope Leo condemned the, quote, iniquitous use of hunger as a weapon of war, saying starving people to death is a very cheap way of waging war. Leo once again referenced the Gospel of Matthew's account of the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes, attributing Christ's miracle to the sharing of food to feed the crowd. Leo went on to call for concrete actions to end hunger, war, and poverty. The U.S. strikes on nuclear facilities in Iran and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza. How have these multiple conflicts affected the relationship between Christians and Jews in the region? Here with an update, I'm joined by the president of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, Yael Eckstein, thank you so much for being here. Tell me about the humanitarian situation in the Holy Land. I mean, the news of which has been overshadowed by these strikes in Iran. You've been out in the area visiting families, assessing needs. Tell us what you're seeing out there.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. What an honor it is to be able to share from here in
Sure.
Israel what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
As so many people know, over 600 days and 35,000 rockets from 7 different fronts later, Israel is still here. And what we're seeing is this is really not just a military conflict, but within the wars, I always like to see the human story, the suffering. And that's where the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews comes in, where the humanitarian first responder. So for the past week, I was stuck in America, which we'll talk about soon,
Yeah.
for the first week of the war. So my staff and volunteers were on the ground. But as soon as I landed in Israel, I've been going place to place, exactly where the rockets have fallen, and providing humanitarian aid. And what I've seen are families who have lost everything in an instant when that rocket strikes. It's a ballistic missile that traveled over 2,000 miles and is striking apartment building complexes, innocent civilians, hospitals, synagogues, schools. And so the fellowship is on the ground, being there in the first moments to say, we are here with you. Here's food, here's clothing, even a toothbrush for their children they don't have. And so it's the human story, the human suffering, the elderly who are living alone with no one, with broken windows from the impact, that the fellowship is there to say, you're not alone, and we're going to be here to provide hope and physical aid.
Yeah, really, since the events of October 7th in 2023, the state of Israel has been in a state of war with Hamas that is yet to end. Add to that Israel's conflict with Iran now. They're really fighting a two-front war, and I know there's a ceasefire now, and I hope it lasts. But how has that impacted your work and your ability to travel? I know you were trapped in the United States and you couldn't get to Tel Aviv, but Tel Aviv has been hit hard, right?
It's been hit very hard. I was just in Bat Yam, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, and what I saw was at the site of the impact, there were 6 buildings that were completely destroyed. When I was there was still a woman who was buried under the rubble. But then for 2 miles from this one ballistic missile that hit, for 2 miles, there were no windows on any of the apartment buildings. And what we're seeing from Rehovot to Bat Yam to Haifa to even places in Jerusalem, what we're seeing, it's the poorest neighborhoods that are affected the most. And so when you talk about a multi-front war in northern Israel, we have Hezbollah who's been attacking us. We had Syria. In southern Israel, we've had Hamas, we had Iran, the Houthis, and Israel's the size of New Jersey. And so the human suffering on the ground in Israel is enormous, but I have to point out, so is the resilience, that wherever I go, I went to go visit a woman, Zelda, 92 years old. She fell on the way running to a bomb shelter. She had no windows because they were cracked from a ballistic missile attack that happened around a mile and a half away from her home. And I went to her with a simple food box and I said, this is from Christians and Jews who recognize we have to be here together, that this isn't just a military operation. This is a human operation of making sure the people on the ground, the innocent people, are cared for and haven't lost hope. And she took the food and she started kissing it and she started crying while she was laughing and said, I never thought I would feel so much joy from a food box, but I haven't had food for a week because I can't go out to the grocery stores. I don't have any family. No one's checking on me. This is the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
And that's where, for me, our work feels so relevant and holy.
Yael, before I let you go, tell me where the first vision of this came from, bringing Christians and Jews together to help those who are suffering in the Holy Land.
Well, it was 42 years ago that my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein of blessed memory, saw that for thousands of years we've been so focused on what tears us apart. But it's time that we focused, "Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad," how good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell together in peace, to focus on what brings us together. And Israel is the spiritual homeland of Christians. And even in the Christian Bible, it says that they're grafted onto the rich olive tree of Israel, that together we are holding these Judeo-Christian values dear, as there's a evil death cult that's trying to wipe them out. And we can't just be in the same category when we're being targeted. We have to also stand together in life for those holy values. So I think that vision has become more relevant today than ever before as Christians are being persecuted and killed throughout the Middle East, as Israel's being targeted. We have to stand together to be the light in midst of this darkness that we see trying to overtake the free world.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're safe, and I hope you remain so, and all of your neighbors. And to find out more about Yael Eckstein and the great work of International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, visit ifcj.org. Thank you so much, Yael. Be safe. Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you.
This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Oscar-winning film Braveheart. This week on the Arroyo Grande Show, I spoke with author, director, and screenwriter Randy Wallace about the origins of the film and his storied career. He also directed and wrote We Were Soldiers, based on the life of Lieutenant General Hal Moore, whom you'll hear a little bit about and from later in the show. Take a look. Tell me about We Were Soldiers, speaking of transcendent good.
Yeah.
I knew Lieutenant Hal Moore, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. He was such a heroic and great man.
Yeah.
How did you come across the story?
So I went to the bookstore and was looking. I love to read nonfiction. It informs me, I think, more than, even though I love fiction, I write fiction. And here's this book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. I picked up that book and I opened it on the plane and did not put it down the whole flight to Hawaii. And I came across in the preface, Hollywood has gotten the story of the Vietnam veteran wrong every damn time, whetting the knives of twisted politics on the bones of our dead brothers. And I was like, okay, wow, I am in. I got off the plane and I called my agent and I said, somebody has got to own the movie rights to this book. You tell them I'll kill a relative to get to write this story. And he said, I'll get right back to you. So he calls me the next day and says, they won't sell the movie rights because they're afraid Oliver Stone will end up with them, or it'll be turned into, you guys were baby killers and all of that. And so I said, okay, give me their number. And I called them. I got Joe Galloway, the journalist
himself.
And I said, you don't know me. I've written a script called Braveheart. I'm going to send it to you. It's currently in production, but you've never heard of my name. But you read it, and then if you like it, call me. So next day he calls and goes, okay, let's talk. So I said, I can go to a studio based on the success of Braveheart, and I can get them to pay you.
This, yeah.
But they will own it, and then they'll do anything they want to with it. If you will let me buy it with my own money, I'll pay you my own money to buy the movie rights. And I'll write you a deal that you'll make more money and success than you would have ever made from the studio. And if you don't like what I do, you'll know who to come shoot. And they went in. And then Hal proceeded to become one of the great mentors of my life. He was like a second dad.
Great man.
So yeah, great man.
Oh, great man. Every year, I went with him a couple of times when he would go to the Vietnam Memorial with his Rangers, and every year there would be less of them. And it was very moving.
They'll tear your heart out. Yeah,
it was very moving.
Yeah,
incredible men. The entire Arroyo Grande interview with Randy Wallace is on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show or wherever you get your podcasts. Take us with you on Spotify, Apple, iHeart. Be sure to subscribe. We don't want you to miss an episode of the Arroyo Grande Show. Visit RaymondArroyo.com for all the links. He's a best-selling author, a nationally syndicated radio host, and host of the Todd Starnes Show on Newsmax. He joins me now to share his brand new book, just in time for Independence Day, Spangled Blessings, Devotions for Patriots. Please welcome back to the show, Todd Starnes. Todd, thanks for being here. I'll get to your book in a moment, but I know you've been covering the events of this Israel-Iran conflict and the U.S. involvement. You've been critical of the idea of regime change in Iran, saying that we got into problems with this and we tried it back in 1979 in Iran. Tell us how so, and should the U.S. refrain from further involvement in this conflict?
Raymond, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Always great to hang out with you, and you've got a terrific audience. Yeah, I have been pretty critical of what's been happening in the Middle East. Look, I stand with President Trump. I think he made the right call here. The issue for Americans in Iran was this nuclear program. they've been chanting "Death to America" in the streets. I know MSDNC, the folks over there say, well, "Death to America" doesn't really mean death to America. Well, it sure doesn't mean howdy do. Come on over for some hummus and falafel. I'm taking them at their word. So I think again, we need to make sure that there were never going to be mushroom clouds over any major American cities. So I think the president made the right call here. As far as regime change goes, it hasn't worked for us. We just don't do regime change well. There's only one time in American history where it's actually worked, and that was the Revolutionary War. So I think really when it comes to Iran, and the Iranian people are beautiful people. You look at Iran pre 1979. Yes, there was a dictator, but he was a secular ruler. People of all faiths were able to worship freely in Iran. People were able to have jobs and get education. Women were allowed to go out into the public marketplace and be educated. All of those things went away. But the reality is, Raymond, if the Iranian people want freedom, they're going to have to do what our forefathers did, and they're going to have to fight for it.
Yeah. In one of the odder stories of late regarding this Iran-Israel conflict, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, Todd, posted a message of support for the victims of the U.S. bombing of nuclear facilities in Iran, calling it a tragic event. The department deleted and apologized for that. But what does it tell you about the L.A. Sheriff's Department that they feel free, Todd, to weigh in on foreign policy on the wrong side, supporting an Islamic regime in Iran?
It's a great point, Raymond, and you've seen this play out across the entire nation where Democrats are now siding with the Iranians. These are very brutal, dangerous people we're talking about here. These are people that want to destroy Israel, wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and people who want to wipe us off the face of the earth. And a lot of it goes back to this idea that we are considered to be infidels. So, look, it is a very dangerous game that the Democrats are playing. And again, I think it's really an illustration of Trump derangement syndrome gone wild, where their hatred of Donald Trump is so great that it would even discolor their feelings and opinions of this terrorist regime known as Iran.
A domestic terrorist targeted a Christian church in Wayne, Michigan. And the church had an armed security guard, Todd, and a deacon who ran into the would-be assassin with his Ford truck. But the shooter was killed by the security guard, by the way, ending what should have been or would have been a massacre. One person was injured. Why are we seeing these kinds of attacks on churches and synagogues happening with more frequency, Todd, in America?
Yeah, no, and that's what's horrifying about this. And I think we've come to understand that churches are soft targets, and it's really imperative for every church and synagogue in the nation to have a very strong and well-trained security team. It doesn't matter if you've got 50 people going to your church or 5,000. You need to make sure you've got a security plan and know how to execute it. I would recommend, based on what happened in Wayne, Michigan, that at least part of that plan should include a deacon who drives a Ford F-150 pickup truck.
Or two. Yeah.
Or two, yeah, exactly. But again, Catholic churches, Protestant churches, and synagogues, I will say in Memphis, we have a very large Jewish population. Every Saturday, I drive by the synagogues, and you can tell their security is up front and present, and they know that they're going to be well protected as they worship.
Todd, I want to move on to your new book, Spangled Blessings, Devotions for Patriots. It's out in stores now, just in time for Independence Day. Why did you write this book now? I mean, and what inspired you to make it a devotional?
Yeah, I normally write political books,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do something a little bit different. I'm a person of faith, and I really believe that God has blessed America. And so I wanted to take readers on a journey through the entire history of the nation. And we have some great stories about how God used the most unusual people to advance his work here in the United States of America. And isn't that the story of our God? Our great God is that he uses the most unusual, the least of these to accomplish great things. And we tell those stories in the devotion. My co-author, Michelle Cox, she has written devotion books for a Hallmark show called When Calls the Heart. And she has a lot of grandkids. I don't have grandkids, but she wanted us to write a book that would be an encouragement to the entire family. You can sit down, moms, dads, kids, or grandkids, and you can read these stories and learn about some of the great ways that God has blessed our country.
Todd, you're right about what defines us as Americans. Next year, we'll celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. What's the one word that defines America in your estimation, and Americans, if you had to give it one word?
Freedom. We're all about freedom. And I think also that, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, I write in the book about Eisenhower. I believe he was actually our most religious president in modern political history. It was Eisenhower who was the only president who was baptized after Inauguration Day. Now, he's a Presbyterian, but we don't know if he was given the Baptist dunk or the Presbyterian sprinkle. The ceremony was private, but we write about his devotion to God, and he understood back in the 1950s the war with the communists was not a political war as much as it was a spiritual war, good versus evil. And so Eisenhower understood the importance of faith, and he made it okay for people to talk about their faith in public. In God we trust on our currency because of Eisenhower. The National Day of Prayer because of Eisenhower, and of course the words "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance because of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So it's interesting, Raymond, when you look at his story, during his presidency, church attendance in America rose 20% thanks to that bully pulpit.
Incredible. That is incredible. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew about some of those things, but I didn't realize it all happened under Ike's watch. Each chapter in the book, Todd, you include a prayer, a lesson on liberty, and a few questions to help readers put this into application in their own lives. It's really a celebration of American values of faith and family. Tell me what you want readers to come away with here.
Yeah, this is not a Debbie Downer book. As a matter of fact, we offer these questions. We call them Yankee Doodles, and we have liberty lessons, and we offer a patriot prayer. We want people to know about the greatness of their country and the good people in this country. We tell stories, for example, like the young men who defended Old Glory at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. We have a devotion about Riley Gaines and this young lady, a college athlete, taking a stand and making a difference. So yeah, this is a celebration of America, and we want our kids and grandkids to know as well that this is a country worth fighting for. This is the most exceptional nation on the earth, and this is a nation that God has blessed. And of course, we end the book with really a moving story about Ronald Reagan that many people don't know. But Reagan was a man who loved to share his faith in God with people. And we tell the story of how he shared his faith with his father-in-law, who was an atheist towards the end of his life. It's really an amazing, incredible, and inspiring book.
Yeah, well, your timing couldn't be better, Todd. The book is Star-Spangled Blessings, Devotions for Patriots by Todd Starnes and Michelle Cox. It's available in bookstores everywhere and online, and the Todd Starnes Show is always the highlight of my day. Todd, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Raymond.
A Korean War veteran and commander of the first U.S. engagement of the Vietnam War, Lieutenant General Hal Moore was a true leader, respected by his men as well as his enemies. He was a West Point graduate, a beloved father and husband. Mel Gibson immortalized him on the big screen in We Were Soldiers, based on his memoirs. Hal Moore passed away in 2017. I sat down with him in D.C. in 2008 to talk about his Catholic faith, his military service, and his life. Let's talk for a moment about one of the battles that defined your life, the Ia Drang battle. Tell me what that was like and what lingering marks it has left on you 40-plus years later.
This battle occurred in November of 1965. I was a lieutenant colonel infantry commanding 450 men of the 11th of the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. And we were ordered into the Ia Drang Valley of South Vietnam, next to the Cambodian border, to find and kill a suspected large enemy force. The enemy was indeed there, and we wound up fighting for 3 days and nights nonstop against probably over 2,000 North Vietnamese regulars, well-armed, automatic weapons, and they were not afraid to die. I lost 79 of my precious men killed and 120 wounded, and none missing in action. One of my proudest accomplishments in 2 wars in Asia is that I have never lost a man prisoner of war or missing in action. I brought them all home.
And that was a vow you made to those men. You vowed to them that you'd bring every one of them back, and you made them promise that they'd bring you back if you fell on that battlefield.
That's exactly right.
And you made good on that promise.
Yes, that promise was made at a formation at Fort Benning, Georgia, before we went to Vietnam, and I promised my men I'd bring them all home. And I said, if I go down, I want you to bring me home too.
Let's talk for a moment about those men. I know they mean a lot to you. You get together with them, what is it, every Veterans Day?
Well, we get together over Veterans Day, and also on occasion we have reunions during the year. My men in 1965 were a mixture of regular Army volunteers and draftees. Wow. So, in fact, probably over maybe 3/4 of my troopers were draftees. But they fought hard, they fought well for each other, and they were not afraid to die. I was born in a Catholic family in a small town in Kentucky. I was raised by Catholic teachers through the 8th grade by the nuns of St. Francis Xavier, by the Sisters of Charity. And then I went to St. Joseph Prep School, run by the Brothers of St. Francis Xavier. I went to Mass almost every day. And then when I went to West Point, I was so dumb at West Point that the only reason that I got through West Point was going to Mass almost daily and praying to God to help me get through West Point. But I'm proud to say that I graduated at the top of the bottom 20% of my class.
All right, that a boy. You were right there with me. We were in the same class. You had a Father Murdoch who was your spiritual director and kind of mentor at West Point. What influence did he have on you?
My first week at West Point, I think I got there on a Wednesday. We reported in, and we were treated very sternly by the upperclassmen, I'll put it mildly. But on Saturday, after the inspection at noon, and at 1 o'clock Saturday inspection in ranks, we were formed as a group, and we were told that each of you now have an opportunity to go to a church of your choice. And we had a non-denominational chaplain, and we had a Catholic chaplain. And I chose to go to the Catholic chaplain. I was born and raised a Catholic. And I met Father Murdoch at that time. And I became very close friends with Father Murdoch. All through my years at West Point, I was very dumb in mathematics, which was is based on West Point was based on mathematics in those days. And I had to study late at night till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I went to Mass every morning at 6:30. And that's when you had to fast the night before. You couldn't eat before communion. But I went to Mass every morning at 7 o'clock, 20-minute Mass by Father Murdoch, and that got me through West Point. And all through my life, I have tried to keep fresh in my mind that the whole purpose of life on earth is to qualify for life hereafter in heaven with our Father in heaven. And I've tried to do that in my life. And this booklet here, A General Spiritual Journey, documents my firm religious beliefs. I'm a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, but my mother was a non-Catholic. She raised us all Catholic. My father was a Catholic. And I really, it doesn't matter to me what religion that a person has. If he's Jewish, if he's Protestant, Methodist, Baptist, we all come from the same God, and we all must worship the same God. And someday we will all meet that same God, and he'll pronounce judgment on us. And I'm going to do my best to qualify to make the cut.
Did you always want to be a soldier?
Probably so. I was a Boy Scout. I loved being in uniform as a Boy Scout. I read every book I could find in the school library on West Point, and I developed at an early age a firm ambition and desire to go to West Point and be an Army officer. I tried hard to get an appointment through my regular senators and congressmen, but I was unable to do that. And finally, at the age of 17, I was offered a job in Washington, D.C. in the Senate warehouse, and I immediately left St. Joe Prep. I finished high school at night with taxi cab drivers and government workers in Washington.
All alone?
I lived with an elderly couple, and then I finished high school at night. Then I went to George Washington University at night for 2.5 years. Wow. I joined a fraternity, Kappa Sigma fraternity, lived in the house, and every 2 weeks I would get the list from the Army on which senators and congressmen had not yet appointed a boy to West Point. And I knocked on those doors. Now, without success for 2 years, 2.5 years now. Wow. Now I'm talking about I was from 17 to 18 to 19 to 20 years old. And then when the war began after Pearl Harbor, in the spring of 1941, 42, the Congress authorized every senator and congressman to have one additional appointment to West Point and to Annapolis.
And you made the cut.
And at that time, I went to my congressman, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I've already given that to another son, or to another boy." And I said, "Well, can I have your appointment to Annapolis, to the Naval Academy?" And he said, "Yes, I'll give that to you." And then I said, "Sir, if I can find another congressman who'll swap and appoint me to West Point, would you appoint his kid to Annapolis?" And he said, "I hadn't heard of that, but if you can pull it off, I'll do it."
You're like Monty Hall. You're making deals all over the place. I love this.
It took me 10 days, and I found a congressman from Georgia who would appoint me to West Point. And I was appointed to West Point from the 2nd District of Georgia, Thomasville, Thomas County, Georgia.
I love it. And you've never been there?
I've never been to Georgia in my life.
You know, I remember talking to Mel Gibson several years ago, and he mentioned that the first time he met you, you were praying, he heard you praying a prayer. And when he heard it, he completed the prayer along with you. And it was a prayer from Pope Clement the 11th. And I'll read this prayer. It says, "Discover to me, O my God, the nothingness of this world, the greatness of heaven, the shortness of time, and the length of eternity." And you say in this book, someone's asked you, "What business are you in?" And you say what?
I tell them all, I'm in the business of eternity. And that's the business that I am in. And I hope I'm successful in that business personally.
I want to share with people before we run out of time. You recently wrote an open letter. This was an Independence Day letter to America, and it was called A Pledge of Sacred Honor. Yes. And in it you write, "The national door of principled leadership is wide open for sacred honor, civility, and a sense of kinship and trust." And you're really urging all Americans, but particularly these presidential contenders, to be aware and sign a promise of civility. Why is that so important to you?
Whether or not they sign a paper advocating civility is irrelevant. It would be helpful if they did. But I'm convinced that any person, man or woman, running for public office should be civil towards their opposite numbers who are trying to beat them. I think it's very important. Civility is not only important in the political arena, but in day-to-day activities in all professions. Men and women should be respected and treated civilly, with respect.
Well, sir, I would just want to say personally, you have not only spoken words that are inspiring and lead us, I think, in the right direction, but you've demonstrated them throughout your life. Happy Independence Day, and I thank you for being here again. What a man, incredible man, a great American. Admiral Jeremiah Denton was shot down by the North Vietnamese in 1965. He spent nearly 8 years as a captive in the notorious Hanoi Hilton. He famously blinked the word torture in Morse code during an orchestrated propaganda broadcast in 1966. He exemplified the bravery, heroism, sacrifice shown by American POWs during the Vietnam War. I sat down with him to talk about what being a soldier meant and the faith that was crucial to his survival when hell was in session. Here's my interview with the late Rear Admiral and former U.S. Senator from Alabama, Jeremiah Denton.
We don't have to turn to our history books for heroes. They're all around us. One who sits among you here tonight epitomized that heroism at the end of the longest imprisonment ever inflicted on men of our armed forces. Who will ever forget that night when we waited for television to bring us the scene of that first plane landing at Clark Field in the Philippines, bringing our POWs home? The plane door opened, and Jeremiah Denton came slowly down the ramp. He caught sight of our flag, saluted it, said, "God bless America," and then thanked us for bringing him home.
Admiral, to begin, 1965, I want to take you back to Vietnam. You're shot down, you land in a river, and they begin fishing you out. What is going through your mind at that moment?
Anger, frustration. But before we start, I have to say, all this hero stuff, the only hero of my story is Jesus Christ, not me, okay?
Okay. Well, we will definitely get to that as well.
Yeah.
When you're in there, when they're fishing you out, you're angry, and then they take you and they confine you. They begin to imprison you. What was that like?
Well, from there, they took me blindfolded back to Hanoi, put me in a prison. And what was it like? It's a disorientation. You first start fearing you're going to lose track of time, and you start making calendars on the wall like the mythical prisoners do. And then you learn that Sundays come and it's quiet, and you're able to keep track of time, and you're very conscious that you better know the day because you're going to be accountable later when you get home for what happened. And suddenly time and events per time mean a tremendous amount. That's one of the first impressions. Then when you settle down and realize what your condition is, the next thing that comes in is fear. They're going to torture you for military information or for propaganda stuff. When I was shot down, they weren't torturing, but we were scared they were. They would put a gun to your head and say, tell us so-and-so or we're going to shoot. And I'd say, well, shoot, and it'd click. But we thought that they might start doing it for real, which they did in October of that year, and then it was quite a ride from then on.
What were they after? I know they wanted biographies, confessions. What were those designed for?
Right. The search for military information was not conventional as in wartime. For the Japanese and Germans in certain situations it may have been, but for us, they knew we didn't know anything. The plans were when I was shot down, were being made in the White House virtually. And nobody knew. No general or admiral knew what was going to happen the next day. So that's one thing they'd like to know. So, and the weaponry, it didn't matter much to them. They couldn't do anything about what we had, so they weren't after that. Their strategy and their determination was to bend us to be used, break us to be used for propaganda, because their whole strategy of the war was to go through a few little military dilatory diversions and win the war back in Washington, New York, and Chicago, and in college campuses. And so we were to be broken and to advocate their side in the war. That was their principal objective. In that, they, I think, lost that war. They managed to get a few guys to do that, but most of us didn't give them anything credible in that respect.
You all used to come up with fictitious biographies and that sort of thing to pacify them and to get out.
Yeah, and we'd make them torture us for that. And to say to unconsciousness, you can't be tortured any further than that. Or pull a guy's arms out of socket and then he'd give him a biography and it would be absurd. I had a particularly flamboyant one I would like to see printed on New York Times, and I made them torture me every time they got it. But it was like that.
What sort of torture were they doing in the
Almost
beginning?
different. Well, mostly the rope tricks by which they would bind you up in ropes, cut off the blood circulation, which sounds nothing, but pretty soon your heart's pounding so hard trying to send blood through your body that you can hear it pounding, and you pass out after. And then maybe the first time that happens to you, you break it and give them a biography or something instead. But after you can take it and pass out, maybe fast a little bit and get real weak, that doesn't work too well. It was hard for them. But men are subject to different levels of pain that they can take, you know.
And you were very resolute that you weren't going to give them certainly any military secrets, and you even stashed a little piece of glass in your cell. Why did you do that?
Yeah, I'm a little discomforted. I think they've said something in the code about you resist until the point of no return. But there's a weak part in there. I still think I wasn't able to go to that debriefing. I was asked, but I couldn't. I was doing something else. But I don't think that we should forget that if you give classified military information, particularly sensitive, that you know about, such as ECM, where you turn it, when you turn it on, how you turn it, you can cost the lives of other men, many men. So you got to think about whether you ever should do that. Shouldn't that be an absolute rule, that to the point of ultimate will or resistance, you don't give classified military information? I intended not to, and I had broken glass in my cell, and in case they started, they give you plenty of days to make up your mind. They threaten you before. If they gotten on that attack, I would have cut my wrists.
Tell me about there was a rig they instituted in your cell for 5 days.
There were so many rigs. It's kind of complicated. The one you're talking about is when I surrendered to God. Yeah. It's kind of hard to describe. I was down to about 120 pounds at that point. I didn't have any meat on my butt, so I was sitting on this concrete bed with my ankles in stocks and my hands handcuffed behind me in what they called hell cuffs, which is very painful, a gag in my mouth and blindfolded, and they had a rig under my ankles, under my Achilles tendons was a bar which they could pull on from above on a pulley and push it into my Achilles tendons, and it couldn't go anywhere because my legs are in irons on the top.
Right.
And
so it would just eat away at the Achilles tendon eventually.
Right. They got almost halfway through mine. The first, I surrendered after 5 days and nights, thinking that they would accept some bland lie, some truths they already knew. They wanted to know what our camp communications was. I was a camp commander. If we had lost those communications, they were very complex, countermeasure type thing we've been working on for a long time. We were heavily relying on it for morale and order and discipline.
Right.
The chain of command. I wasn't about to give it. But I said, bow cow, I surrendered. They took me in, and I wrote a bunch of stuff they already knew. And I thought, well, they're going to let me go because they don't want me to die. That was the key. You had to convince them that your life, they had to take your life. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted to save us and exploit us. So, to my surprise and dismay, they put me back in the rig. And it got pretty hopeless. I couldn't think, I couldn't pray anymore. And I said to God, it's not easy to say, expressed with my whole being, I can't think of anything else to pray. I can't think of any recited prayers. I can't think of any spontaneous prayers. I'm in a desperate situation. If anything happens good out of this, it's going to be yours. You got it. You got me. You got everything about me. The instant I said that, I had been going through alternating periods of feeling heat and feeling chills. I was shaking at that time, and you could hear my chains around the camp. And the instant I willed that, it was like a blanket of warmth, just a whole aura of composure, of no pain. The pain was immediate release, which was in my back. That was the principal part of the pain. And I just went from fear, anxiety, almost an unendurable pain, to complete comfort and assurance and no fear. A few minutes later, the guard came in, the camp commander. This is the only time I know that this happened. The camp commander himself came, a guy we call the Lump. He was a pretty senior guy. He came with the 2 guards and told him to go in there and break Denton. Break his legs if you have to, but break him. And he was screaming. He was screaming at them. They came in, and one of the boys was about 19 years old, pretty good kid. We called him Smiley. He did his duty. He tortured, but I don't think he liked it. At any rate, he and the other guards started pulling on his pulley, and I just looked at Smiley with a smile, expressing what was in me. I don't hurt. You're not going to break me, and you're not a bad guy. How can you do this to another human being? His face broke, contorted, tears. He yanked the other guard off the pulley and went outside and started screaming at the camp commander he wasn't going to do that anymore. They're going to have to find somebody else. And 20 minutes later, they came in and put sulfa on my open wounds, released the rig, and carried me out to an isolated place where I supposedly couldn't tell the other guys I hadn't given in.
Your faith and your honor.
That was a miracle to me.
Yeah. Your faith and your honor really fused in that experience, in all your experience in this time.
I don't know why you're throwing honor in there, but faith, yes. Faith, that was the most terrific product of a prayer, of an answer to a prayer that I ever gotten. But all the way through prison, it was like that. They say, you know, anybody in pain or suffering is going to pray. No atheists in foxholes. Some woman with a difficult delivery, they're going to pray and they're going to get relief of some kind. God's going to help them in some way. Right. And we had so many examples of that because we were under such constant pressure and pain and suffering and fear that we prayed a lot and we got a lot of answers, and there's nothing new about that. It's throughout the history of the world and in most everybody's lives. And so I don't like to be, you know, praised for receiving grace from God. You always do.
But you cooperated with it. And you understood it when it was going on, and some people don't. They waste that suffering, they waste that pain. Wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, sure. I think most people cooperate when they're in pain and they're getting help.
Admiral, at this point, tell me what freedom means to you after this experience, and faith, and how they're really bound in your mind.
Well, before the experience, intensely during the experience, and intensely after the experience, I've devoted a lot of thought to the relationship between faith and freedom. If you go back to Athens, the first time democracy was really tried, and darn near the last, because the next time it was Switzerland, and they didn't really complete their democracy the way we did. But in Athens, it failed. It became a classic example which indicated to the political world, political science world, that democracy won't work. Sooner or later, the people just can't handle it. They get to the point where demagogues, which is a word that came in then, can, knowing that they all have special interests, can demagogically talk to them, get them in groups, mess up the unity of the country, right. Promise them things that they can't afford for the state to give. And in other words, they lack self-discipline and compassion. They're just greedy. That's us, we're greedy. But if you have the self-discipline and compassion, let's say it's morality, our founding fathers realized that if you have sufficient self-discipline and compassion, they knew that morality was necessary. And I'd like to read a quote from George Washington because it's so darn important. It takes about, this is what our government ought to read now. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morals are indispensable supports. Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar stature, both reason and experience forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. When I came home, after all the meditation on things like that, realizing that compassion and self-discipline are indispensable to a democracy, and that the only source of that kind of morality comes from a religion where your life, your eternal life, depends on whether you love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is just compassion. We've thrown that out now, subtly, by a period of judicial and legislative following the judicial rulings based on nothing, that you can't have the 10 Commandments in a school because the kids might look at the 10 Commandments and start thinking about them. Well, the country was built on that. Our founding fathers recognized that God, this nation was based on God. And William Penn said it as well as any, men must choose to be governed by God or condemn themselves to be ruled by tyrants. Why? What happened to those statements which founded this country? We soft people, enjoying the consumption of what the previous good principles have produced in a way of a system, blessed by God, and we respecting Him. Think of the founding fathers. They came over from a nation where they'd been persecuted from before. They crossed a hazardous ocean. They landed on a hostile shore with Indians in the climate. They, like POWs or any other soldiers, suffered. They knew about the reality of God. And they were able to be formed into a nation which was knowingly dependent upon God. There were numerous references to God. And in addition, the system was, it was a greater revolution than that. It said, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Never before. It was God, King, divine right of kings, then the people. God, the revolution says, man, individual man, then government, the servant of the people. And they invented a system to do that. And it worked beautifully for a long time. And starting in about after 1950, the premise was questioned. And now, instead of being one nation under God, we are conscientiously and formally and officially one nation without God. And we're wondering why we're having problems. We haven't seen any problems yet unless this reverses.
I want to talk about how you, as an outgrowth of your faith and this conviction and this understanding of freedom, when given the opportunity to go before the cameras and during your interrogation as a POW, you did something extraordinary. And I have tape of that. I want you to look at this and tell me what you're doing here. This is during an interrogation, a television interview.
Well, 3 days ago, they hit me for confession. I'd been tortured unconscious a number of times. I gave them what I hope was a not credible confession. Then they told me, set me up on the top of two stools placed on top of each other and told me they were going to do this to me, have me interviewed, and I was to condemn my government.
Right.
But
the blinking there.
Reisner and I prayed about what I should do. Should I just refuse to go to the interview or go and try to blow it up? And the chances of that working were 1,000,000 to 1, because I go there and I defy them, and then they burn the tape and torture me some more. But I decided to try that, okay? And I got there, and they entered the room, and as they came in, there were these lights like that, and I said, in case they change the words that I intend to say, I'm going to bleep the word torture to prove that they at least had to torture me to get me here. And then when he asked me the questions, they asked me twice, the key sentence being, what do you think of the policy of your government in Vietnam? The first time I said, I don't know what the policy of my government is, because the only sources of news I have are North Vietnamese. But whatever the policy of my government is, I support it, and I will support it as long as I live. They asked me another time, and I said, the same thing about, I don't know what the policy is now, but whatever, but I am a member of that government, and it is my job to support it, and I will support it as long as I live. Well, I thought when they dragged me out of there that nobody was ever going to see that, and I was going to get hurt pretty bad. I was hurt pretty bad, the worst torture I ever got after that. But by the grace of God, that Japanese photographer who had been having such interviews and taping tortured confessions knew he had a big scoop. He sneaked out of Hanoi that night, went back to Tokyo and auctioned it off. The first bidder was ABC for 50 grand. And I didn't learn until 3 days before I was released that when Red McDaniel, who was in that movie you just showed, he was one of the two shown, told me that he had seen it. I didn't know how much they'd seen it. I didn't know how that a lot of people had seen it.
Right, and Navy intelligence
read. I was so
read
grateful
torture
to God.
there.
That was the most great. Yeah, they read the torture, but I believe they knew guys were already being tortured by the fact that some were confessing. I was not proud of that. I was proud that I defied them. That's what, when the Navy gave me the tape of that, they said, Denton not only blinked the word torture. He defied the North Vietnamese. I'm glad God gave me the grace to do that.
Now, once you and your fellow POWs were liberated, you were chosen to speak on their behalf. Here's what you had to say.
No, I wasn't chosen. I was a senior officer on the first plane to land. That's why I spoke.
Well, here's what you had to say.
I was chosen to take the rest of them home after that to Hawaii and the West Coast.
Right. Here's what you had to say on February 12th, 1972, when you arrived at Clark Air Force Base.
1973. I got that wrong in the tape. It's 1973.
We've had the opportunity to save our country under difficult circumstances. We are profoundly grateful to our Commander-in-Chief and to our nation for this day. God bless America. God bless America.
Admiral Denton, what should people know? What should they take from this experience you went through?
Well, again, let's go to veterans. Lexington and Concord, the Battle of New Orleans, Chateau Thierry, D-Day, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Kosovo. They're talking about veterans' absentee ballots coming into Florida now. They burned them. It was another story, but they have disposed of those before. I hope to God somebody is watching over those, because those men deserve to have their votes counted. And this has been circulated on the internet vis-a-vis this election and these guys who voted. Remember, it is the soldier and the sailor, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier and the sailor, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier and the sailor, not the campus organizer, who has given us the freedom to demonstrate. It is the soldier and the sailor who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protester to burn the flag.
What is the message you would give people? What should they remember as a result of this interview and your experience?
Semper Fidelis, always faithful.
What heroes. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Happy July 4th for those of you in the United States. And until next time, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.